Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Renate McNay and my guest today is Saraswathi. Hello Saraswathi.
Hello.
Saraswathi is a teacher of the heart and wrote the most wonderful book, which is actually a novel called Averi And The Unknown, From the Light of Wisdom. And I think it's probably the most amazing novel I ever read. And we will talk about this book and what it is about a little bit later. And first of all, I would like to know what is and means Saraswathi. Your real name is Sophie.
Yes.
Yes.
Sophie.
So why Saraswathi and not Sophie?
Well, I didn't seek it at all.
Yeah.
But Saraswati, basically back in 2010, some people were giving Indian names by a teacher in India. And I just didn't feel it. I didn't feel in my heart to receive an Indian name.
Yes.
But I was on my way to Puttaparthi where Sai Baba lives, and in the car on the way I said to him, I don't have a feeling for an Indian name, but I know that Sophie means philosophical wisdom, wisdom of the mind, and I know you're taking me beyond that, so I hand that over to you. And I forgot about it. And then when I arrived in Puttaparthi, I was in darshan, and these words came, I heard them. Normally I don't hear, I know them rather than hear them, but they were like on a loudspeaker. He said, "You are purity incarnate, Saraswati." And I didn't know what she was or what it meant. I knew that she was a goddess.
So purity
incarnate.
Incarnate.
Saraswati. So I went to go and look her up, and she was the goddess of divine wisdom, not the goddess of philosophical wisdom. So immediately I cried and I said, okay, I accept. It was very beautiful.
Yeah, and how many years was that back?
That was 2.5 years ago, but I didn't actually, no, 2 years ago, but I didn't actually start using it until the beginning of this year.
And you feel very comfortable using it now?
Now I do. Initially there was a little bit of a wobble,
yeah.
But no, now it's very beautiful.
I guess everybody will know, wants to know what it means. And
they do, and I'm still Sophie to those who know me as Sophie. I haven't
Yeah.
completely, I don't mind, but I've been asked to use it for the book, and therefore it's become natural to use it for satsang, so it's sort of unfolded that way.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your awakening. Something happened to you in 2003.
Yes.
And just tell us what happened and who were you before that happened?
Okay, well, I was married at the time. I'd been working as an actress for about 10 years, and in fact I stopped working as an actress at the end of 2000, and something was shifting already then, although I didn't quite know what.
Shifting in your perspective?
Just something, yes. To really answer that question, I'd say it's been a constant, ever since I was very little, moments, if you like, but the big shift occurred specifically on Good Friday 2003. Very mundane situation. I'd gone to a bar to meet a man who was a director at that time, and I'd gone to discuss a film script because I was writing film scripts at the time. And I knew him, I'd met him before, and there was no feeling at all of attraction or anything other than we were going to talk scripts. So I arrive, and at some point in that evening, something just dropped. It was as if it wasn't as if, it was, I saw myself in him. And we were holding each other's hands across the table for dear life, and I knew I wasn't falling in love with him. It's the most extraordinary way to explain. I was falling in love, but it wasn't with him, and I didn't know quite what was going on other than it completely rocked me. And the next morning, I knew also that...
So you're falling in love, were you falling in love with yourself?
I couldn't have said that in that moment, but it was a feeling of falling in love, but...
Was it something which was sad, which...
It was expansive.
It was so there was an expansive situation between the two of you?
Yes, it wasn't personal.
Yeah.
By the same token...
Also not for him?
He had a well, we both had a meeting of the heart, definitely.
Yeah.
So there was a personal connection. But beyond that, it was very sudden, because the next morning I knew I wasn't meant to be with this person. I knew that he was a catalyst for something.
Yeah.
And I also knew that my husband knew that something had happened, and I was devoted to my husband. I was very much, I adored him and loved him very much. So the thought of not being with him was unthinkable.
Yeah.
But I knew that morning, in fact, very early that morning, it was 9 o'clock, my husband had left, and I was doing some yoga, and I finished practice, and I sat on the mat and I just sobbed for about 45 minutes, and the words came, "It's time to say farewell." Just a kind of dramatic thing to say, but they came, and then I just sobbed even more. And I knew, it's so strange to say, but I knew without knowing how I knew that I had to leave.
So when you said the words came, were you familiar with that kind of messages before, or was that the first thing you heard?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I was, because I didn't doubt it.
Yeah.
There was no doubt. There was a clarity in that moment. But what came with that moment sat on the mat was a recognition that I was not separate from any being. So the expansiveness of love that I felt the prior evening was the same recognition that I was not separate from any being. And so that when the words came, they came out of that expansiveness, and therefore it wasn't a question of trust or not trust. I knew that they were truth. And then, of course, that opened the floodgates to, oh my goodness, really? I have to leave?
I guess the mind really started then to kick in, and
it totally kicked in. It went
jumping and screaming.
It was full power tantrum time. So, and
yeah.
And it was such a shock. I mean, it really. I was knocked over. I really didn't know what was what.
So the voice said, "It's time to say farewell," but you had no idea what to do next, where to go.
No.
What that means?
I knew superficially what it meant, that I had to leave my current life. I didn't know how. I didn't know the details of why. I just knew that something had ended, some chapter had come to a close, and I was almost being kicked out of my life. In fact, for a long time, I found myself saying to people, I literally was thrown out of my life in the most auspicious way. But and I couldn't say I knew the purpose, other than I knew that it was the choiceless choice, that heart was telling me to do it, that it was for my good, even though it hurt.
But it takes a lot of courage to follow the heart, doesn't it?
I suppose it does.
Because
one doesn't
it's
feel
unpredictable. You don't know where it goes.
You have no idea, and that's the thing. You have to leap off the cliff.
Yeah.
To come to the heart is to fall off the cliff into love. It is to completely fall in love with the self. And to do that, one has to let go of the reins completely and free fall, effectively. The mind is in free fall.
How did that feel?
Initially, it was absolutely terrifying. It was. I mean, my mind was... There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of... a huge fear of hurting someone else. I mean, there was all the fear about what am I going to do as a person on my own, but the other side was the repercussions of that for my loved ones. You can imagine it was pretty huge for them. And
did they try to stop you?
Yes, oh, absolutely. So, and in fact, it took 5 years to undo all of that that enormously important situation and relationship. But there was a lot of toing and froing in that time. That's why the knowing was so strong, but that doesn't prevent the mind from coming in and then doubting that knowing.
Yeah.
And it really did. I say that because doubt was really strong, and it momentarily made me feel crazy. It made me feel that I was having a nervous breakdown, and I think friends and family also were worried for my health and thought that something awful was happening.
So
to
they
me.
probably thought something was brainwashing you or
Yeah,
something.
I mean, really, it was so out of the blue as well
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I think they were all in as much shock in a way as I was, and certainly my partner was.
And when they ask, well, where are you going? You would say, I don't know. Didn't have any plans.
I didn't have any plans. I mean, I didn't leave the house straight away. I didn't leave the family house for about 4 months. And of course, during that time, I could never lie to my husband, so he knew what was going on. And so we were sort of preparing ourselves for my leaving, and we had a date set when I would actually go. So I physically left, but emotionally I didn't leave for those 5 years, really. But all I could do was say I don't know to every question that was coming my way. And that was terrifying in itself, to say I don't know to someone who is grappling themselves for answers.
Yeah.
But somehow something pushed me out that door, something made my legs walk, and I knew I had no choice.
So where did you go? Where did you end up?
I knew that I was going to stay with a friend just for a weekend.
Yeah.
And after that I didn't know. So the poor thing, I pitched up on her doorstep with my
Did
suitcase.
you have money? Did you have
No, I didn't
anything?
have anything. I literally lost, I had no money, I had no income, no job, no home, no husband. It was literal sort of...
It sounds quite crazy, doesn't it?
It was. I mean, really. I mean, the funny thing is, it didn't feel crazy, of course, because it just felt pure. That's the thing, is that it felt there was no choice. But it did. It was terrifying.
And in this time, within all this craziness and doubts, what else did you feel? What gave you the strength? Really just the knowing that you have to do that, or what else was there?
The knowing, at that time, my attention was obviously very much flipping in between fear and recognition of my knowing. So when recognition was there, the silence in which I found myself was so powerful, so strong, so pure. Such love. I mean, there was such love in that silence of myself that was my fuel, if you like, to get me out the door, to go and do the things that my mind was terrified. I kept pulling myself back to that love, even when I was really flailing. That's the only way I can describe it, is that I was constantly reminding myself somehow of what it was that made me leave in the first place, of that instant recognition that I had with the man in the pub.
And when you reminded yourself, could you actually then feel this place? Was
Yes.
it easy for you to drop back into this place?
It was, without having any language to express it. Back then I wasn't quite sure it's very difficult to express, because I didn't have any language as I might have now, other than a deep knowing. So yes, I could reside there, and even when I flitted, and I would flit for quite, some substantial amount of time, and I'd be in some sort of emotional crisis,
Yeah.
so I could also feel this weight of knowing. At the time it felt like a split. It felt like this knowing was keeping me here, and this terror was making me jump and dart and go all over the place. But something was holding me in the pit of my gut, if you like, and saying, no, just have the tantrum, it's got to come out, you stay here. And to be fair, along the way, I had guides along. I mean, there were the people that I met along the way, even friends who were supporting me in this decision. And that's why, to go back to your answer about how did I know where I was going to go, I didn't. But somehow, having made that leap into the literal unknown, I was so provided for, and life sort of set me up with places, with people who were in complete support of that, which also aided my knowing. It gave me that validation that I wasn't completely bonkers.
Okay, so you had the first weekend with a friend, and where did you go then?
In fact, that then merged into 2 weeks. Bless her heart, she let me stay for. We had a wonderful time, actually. She was such a godsend. And then from there, a friend then said, oh, why don't you come and look after my flat? It's available for a month. So I went there. And then from there, someone said, oh, I'm trying to sell my place. You can look after it for a month. I'll go there. It literally, I was sort of, I never asked anyone.
And in all this time, you were moving around. What did you do with yourself?
I continue to do some odd bits of work. At that time, I didn't have a permanent. I've never had a permanent contract job, actually, to be fair. But I was managing to get some little bits of income. So days were filled with doing that.
You were writing, I assume.
Actually, no, I wasn't writing at the time. I was just working like waitressing work. Very simple, nothing to do with what was going on internally.
Yeah.
And yet it was, because that work was helping me stabilise in my knowing. Everything that came along was helping me steer me in a way and bolster me. So, and I didn't start writing until the next year. Then words came.
So somehow you ended up in India?
Yes, not for a while, yes.
Oh, not for a while?
About 3 years, I think.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So, and then there you met Sai Baba?
Yes, but I knew of him before. In fact, it was he that called me to India, so...
He that called? How did that work?
I can't really remember the first time he came into my awareness, but he was somehow there, and back in, I think, 2006, I'd gone to see a healer. And at the time, I didn't know it at the time, but his whole waiting room was just a shrine to Sai Baba. The whole wall was just plastered in his pictures. And it wasn't until a year later I was thinking of going back to this healer, and I looked him up on his website, and I suddenly realised there were pictures of Sai Baba on his website, and I remembered all these photographs that hadn't sort of pierced my awareness at the time. And I clicked on one of the photographs just prior to that. 2 weeks prior to me clicking on this website, I had asked a question to Sai Baba. I had said to him, I feel I'm being called to India. I feel you want me to come to India, but if you want me there, I need a sign. I need something concrete. And so, 2 weeks later, I clicked on this website and on his photograph, and the printer behind me went crazy, printing out 85 pages of his words. So I just started laughing and said, okay, fine, I'll come. So that was my first trip, which was in 2007, I went.
Yeah, and how was it there, in his ashram?
Initially, I hated it, and yet I loved it at the same time. It's a very strange split. My heart got me there. I knew I had no choice to be there. I didn't know quite why I was there. There was the rational side of my mind going, you're in an ashram with thousands of people, with a man in an orange robe, what on earth are you doing? And yet that didn't really bite. Those thoughts came, but I can remember being in darshan, which is, darshan is a silent benediction when you, I'm sure you know, where you sit in the presence. And it was just love. I mean, there was just pure love. There are no words to express what he is. I knew I was in the right place. At the same time, I kicked up an almighty stink because I really was not happy with the ashram. I was not happy with the fact that men and women were separated, and that there were rules for this and that, and I had to wear a certain dress. And
it's very military-like, isn't it?
It felt.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't. It feels the most obvious thing in the world that one should not be sleeping in the same room with men. I mean, it's just obvious. But now, then, I was. I didn't want, my ego didn't want anyone telling me what to do. It's my life, thank you very much. And so I kicked and screamed for about 2 weeks, and then I got ill, and I knew I had to be. I got really ill, and it literally knocked me to my knees and brought me fully to him. I mean, it knocked me to my knees and on the floor to him, and I went, yes, okay, I'm yours.
So you literally went to him? You were with him?
No, internally.
Internally, yeah.
Because there was a...
So you surrendered to something which you thought he was? Or how did it work? What was that internally you experienced?
Then it will be different. My explanation now is very different from then.
Yeah.
So, because now I know I was surrendering to my own self, but then the mind needed a form to surrender to. And the form that comprised this man in an orange robe was, he was communing with me inwardly anyway. I was having a lot of conversations with him inwardly, a lot of dreams, a lot of visions with him, guiding me constantly. So it was a knowing that I was surrendering to love. And love was appearing to me in the form of this man. But at the same time, the ego needed that form to surrender to, because the ego was still very much in full possession of itself. And therefore, it didn't want to surrender to a person, and it certainly didn't want to surrender to a man. There was a whole lot of that going on, you know, the male-female drama, which was part of my story. So it was very key to this personality that it was sort of flawed to what I thought was a man. Eventually, in time, all that was stripped away to recognize that he is my own self in the form of a he. But then I needed that form, most definitely.
How did you recognize that? How did that come to recognize that he was you?
It wasn't instantaneous. It's taken 2 or 3, 4 years maybe even, to peel away. Effectively, what he, for me, has done was peel all away the layers. First of all, it began with complete sincerity to him. I remember, just before, to answer that, just before I was living in France before I went to India. And I remember I was sat around a table with some people who I didn't know very well, and one of the guys said, let's go around the table and everyone say what it is you most want in life. And so people were going around, and I was terrified by the question. I was like, oh, I don't know what to say about things like that. And people were sort of saying, you know, their dreams, what they wanted. And I didn't know what was going to come out of my mouth, and suddenly it came to me, the words, I want to be truthful, came out. And it sort of silenced everyone, and it silenced me. And that sort of was the marker for everything, because that, with Sai Baba, was I knew that he was part of that act of needing truth, of wanting to be truthful, therefore, in every moment of my existence, which meant going under the hammer in a way, because through being dissected, having every impulse, every thought, every deed, every action, every aspect of my personality under the microscope, and really looking to see all the ways in which I've limited myself, without judgment either. Eventually, after doing that for a number of years, there came a point when the question came, well, who is this one who is dissecting? And is that really me? Who is that one who is worshipping this form? Who is that one who is loving Baba? And is that really me? And it was like a mirror shining me back straight to me, because that's what he is. He is a mirror. I mean, that's what we all are, mirrors shining ourselves back to ourselves. But that recognition came out of total dissection of the personality for this one.
So that's, in a way, what I read in your book of somewhere. Awakening is the first step. Then one needs to clear up the whole world. All the strings that bind us need to be washed out before we are free.
Yes. Yes. It's from that deeper perspective that we really become to know ourselves personally and impersonally. I think there's a line in Averi when Nick says, to know what you are beyond manifestation is to know what you are in manifestation. So therefore, once you are in recognition of that primary I, the real I, you're then in a position, you're from that deeper perspective, you can watch the little I.
Yes.
With such, it's expansive again, it's that expansive seer. That is the conscience, that is love. That's its perfume, it's like love is its perfume. And from this space, you're able to watch oneself as if you're a character in a play.
And yet those two are not separate.
That's what happens eventually. One recognizes it's all one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
That this little I is an aspect within myself. They cannot be separated, but at the beginning, in a sense, they have to be, because the mind is so addicted to thinking, it's so addicted to the personality, that initially one has to separate oneself from one's thoughts, to eventually see that I am the thoughts too. The thoughts are not the problem. It's the attachment and the identification to the thought that causes the trickiness.
So how far are you into clearing up the world? I guess it's an endless job, isn't it?
It's a work in progress, definitely.
Yeah.
Until I leave this body. And it doesn't trouble me, it's my joy. You know, it's an absolute joy, because...
Yeah, it's an adventure.
It is, and the ego is no longer something to annihilate in an aggressive way. The ego is my gift to bring me back to myself. So there's no antagonism. If anything comes to trigger this one, it's immediately seen to be useful to me. If there's a trigger, then it's about me.
But can you always stop at that moment when you see, okay, I'm in an ego action here? Can you stop and let it go?
It's how to answer that, because there's no one stopping anymore, because that's the default position.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So, because the perspective has shifted, therefore the perspective is not, my attention is not, how to say, yes, if something comes up and it bites or something burns me inside, I'm not forgetting this. I'm seeing that burning from here at the same time.
So that is always your reference point.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore I don't ever feel suffering, because all that something is bad, there's no bad, there's only misunderstanding. If something feels negative, I know that there's a misunderstanding in me that needs looking at.
And how is this process of looking? Let's say you see something. Okay, what do you inquire into that, or why is it necessary to look at it? Is it not enough just to seeing?
Inquiry, it's quicker than that. I'm not consciously sitting down and saying, okay, who is this one who's feeling this anymore?
Yeah.
It's not instantaneous, but it's very quick, so it's seen straight away. It's like watching myself as if I were another person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching a character. In fact, Baba often says, look at your mind as if it were someone else's mind.
Yeah.
So I'm watching an actress on stage sometimes, and I see her exits and her entrances, and I see her motivations, but it's all seen from here, so therefore I'm not getting plugged into her drama. Mm-hmm. In the same way. But I see also that there are specific traits, if you like, that I've come into this lifetime with, that are those traits that burn especially. And sometimes one thinks that they've all gone, one thinks, oh, that's no longer. But a little nugget will come along just to check, and just to give you a little test. And I can see the test as it's happening, if that makes sense. So it's very inward, it's very internal, and it's quick nowadays.
Now, what I am curious about is that all these programs we have, all this conditioning, they go quite deep into our body. They manifest in our body as held energies.
Sure.
So our body is not free in that sense. How do you experience that in your body, if there's anything for you to release, because you're quite young and maybe there is not so much baggage you carry around?
No, there was a fair amount.
Yeah. So is this eventually released as well?
It's not separate. The body-mind is one mechanism.
Okay.
So the more one releases, it's the same, it's a dual thing, because the body is only manifesting
Your mind.
The mind. So therefore they'll both be releasing simultaneously. And the deeper one works, you get to the real roots.
Well, as far as I understand, the body only releases it when you somehow go into this pain.
Sometimes
when you relive, not in your mind, not the story, but when you relive somehow the pain, then there's a way for the energy to disperse.
Absolutely. So I'm not in antagonism to if pain comes, then I know something has to be looked at. A lot of the work as well, when I'm working with other people too, is the pain has to be, you have to feel it, to know it, to understand. It has to be brought into your understanding. So the process of bringing yourself under the microscope is to feel, to experience that experience, because you can't understand why it's happened unless you're really feeling it, and then you can dig and really dig. So yes.
Okay, so let's continue with your story. So you became very ill at Sai Baba, and I think you moved out from the ashram.
I did. I got well looked after.
Yes. Some angels were there.
Yeah, they did. I was taken into someone's house, and it was just, I was in India, and I was getting, there's no hot water or anything like that. I had lovely, luxurious beds, and baths and all the rest of it. I was totally spoiled. Yes.
And then you recovered?
I recovered, and then when I was there, again, it was very, very quick. It was like I was being kicked out of Puttaparthi, kicked out of my marriage, then kicked out of Puttaparthi, and then when I was there, during those 2 weeks, and while I was ill, I'd seen a painting of a mountain.
Yes.
On a wall, and I didn't know where it was, and I saw it, and I just cried. I was like, oh my goodness, where is that? I have to go there. And it was such a pull of love to this mountain, which I can't say I'd had before. So I trusted it instantly, and then within 3 days of recovering from being ill, I found myself in a car with 2 people who happened to live where this mountain was, and went to this place called Arunachala in Tiruvannamalai, and thought I was just going for a weekend visit, and stayed for another 7 weeks. And
that was the ashram from Ramana Maharshi.
That's it, exactly. Who I didn't know. I had no idea of him until I got there. So again, it was like Baba led me to where I needed to be, and the mountain itself, there are no words to express the mountain, obviously, but it is effectively coming into contact with oneself, being in the presence of this mountain. And so the process to really peel away to what I am beyond this body began in those 7 weeks there.
How can you talk more about that?
Well, it began with the body very, very specifically, because I had 3 more fevers. I was covered head to toe in a burning rash. I was a mess. I mean, I was really losing weight, by the day, and yet it was fine. I wasn't worried about being ill. I just knew it was a process and stuff was happening. And but at that time, I was still very much, identified with this. So it was very personal. All my buttons were being pushed. Particularly at that time was being worked through the leaving of the marriage. That was, at that time, was still very big on the agenda to sort through. And so all I can say is that during that time, there's not a lot of questioning going on, actually. It's just allowing everything to come up that has to come up. Trusting that, really just trusting where I'm meant to be in each moment. I was learning, if you like, how to trust falling. So that when someone says, go and see this person, and the heart says, yes, I must do that, I would do it. In a sense, I was learning myself through trusting that intuitive recognition. But at the same time, I was still very locked into this form. And it wasn't until maybe a year or 2 later that the real understanding of what I am beyond this form started. It was almost like pieces started to fall into place. The person was really being dug out initially, and then we got to what was beyond the person.
And does that mean you shifted away from the identification of the form, the body, into the ground of nature.
Yes, how to answer it? It's funny. I think a year later, I think after that, I think it was 2008, Baba sent me to Muji. He sent me back to India. And I remember sat in satsang with him.
With Muji?
Yeah, with Muji.
Yeah.
And I'd known of him the previous year. I'd heard about him when I was last in India. So when I then came back, it was very clear I would go to Puttaparthi and then I would come, and felt very strongly I must be in his presence. But I didn't know what it was. I just knew I had to be there. And when I was sat in front of him, it was instant recognition that what he was speaking was my words. It's the only way I can really describe it. It wasn't. It was my language. I knew it.
Understand, yeah.
So there was no doubt, there were no questions. It was just I was bathing in myself in his presence. And there was such love. I mean, it was just everything just was dropping away. That wasn't to say there wasn't still a Sophie coming up and, you know, knocking on the door and say, hey, I'm here. She was still actively doing that. But again, it was, the layers were being so peeled back that I was able to sit in that presence. There was no doubt that what I was formless, timeless, descriptionless, and that I was home. So it began, Swami gave me, in effect, to come into the presence of Muji was such a, more than a gift. I mean, it was more than a gift, because it was through him facilitated that recognition that I am him.
How beautiful. And then one day you felt compelled in the morning to get up
I know,
to your
it's very
computer
cheeky. He does it all the time. He gets me to
and
do
write
things.
this book.
Yes, and I was slightly resistant at the time because I was working on another project, and I was sort of, you know, working full days, and life was really quite busy at that time because I was taking care of my mother as well, who was sick, so days were really full. And so the only time I could really write quietly on my own was in the early mornings. So I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the title, Averi And The Unknown, was like a movie title across the screen of my vision, and I just saw it. And I knew it was a book, but that's all I knew. And I sort of wanted to go back to sleep. I was like, oh no, what's this now? And I came down to the computer at 6, turned it on, and I didn't even know what Averi was. And the first paragraph came, and then I gathered it was a man. And I was still resistant, and I think I wrote the first chapter in that morning, and then I put it away for 2 weeks, and I was like, oh no, I'm busy, I'm doing other things. And yet something told me that those other things were not going to happen until this happened. And so yes, and it came very fast every morning for 2.5 months. It came, I had no idea what would happen each day. And then when it was finished, it was like something had just sort of emerged out of me without any knowing quite how, but I trusted it profoundly.
Well, it's fascinating. It's 2 stories running parallel.
Yes.
So one is Averi, and who is a young fisherman.
Yes.
And goes through a teaching, or has this teaching by Nix, who
Yes.
is his, I guess, his true nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say, it's one in this teaching, Nix, or I don't know how to pronounce
yeah,
it,
perfect.
gives to Averi is the most comprehensive teaching I know about. And as you were writing that, did you always understand what came through you? I guess you also learned through
it was
writing
both.
it? Yeah.
It was both. The recognition that I am prior even to consciousness had started to emerge in 2009. And I can remember very often it comes through words, the written word, and words will come. And I'd written something like, the more I merge in the I am that I am, the deeper I see that I'm beyond both the I me and the I self. And I remember these words came, this was back in 2009, and I almost sort of did a double take on them because...
So say it again, the more?
I'm hoping that I'm quoting this right, but it was, the more I merge in the I am that I am, the deeper I see that I am beyond both the I me and the I self.
Yes.
And something in me went, well, how, first of all, the I am that I am. I'm saying something is referring about beingness. So therefore, what's aware of beingness? I'm commenting on my own beingness. And immediately it was like someone had just sort of chopped my head off and pulled my entrails out, because, wow, I'm beyond even that. And then I can remember, it must have been around the same sort of time, I was talking to Moody about the experience that I'd had when I first, let's say, woke up. That such love, such expansive love, so pure. And out of that discussion came his pointer, what's aware even of that? And suddenly everything just dropped, because I'm even there prior to my most spiritual experience. Even the most sublime moment of bliss is appearing as an experience within me. So the recognition had appeared prior, about a year before, and it was deepening and deepening and deepening. And somehow through this book, although I didn't know it at the time, I had no idea what was happening, truth was expressing itself and deepening within me. At the same time, clearing out whatever needed to be cleared out. So it was sort of a dual thing happening.
And the second story is a young girl who is in the psychiatric hospital.
Yes.
And she is teaching, or try to teach her therapist about the oneness of being. And then in the end, those two stories come together. And it's so interesting. About 2 or 3 days ago, we got an email of one of our watchers of Conscious TV. And she said she works in a psychiatric hospital. And she's surrounded by a lot of crazy people. Mm-hmm. And she would like to come to Conscious TV and talk about her experience, because she had this awakening experience, and now she understands where these people are in the mental hospital. Mm-hmm. She can see them now and see why they appear to be crazy, because that's how she feels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are various levels here that seem to be being explored within it, because one of the most beautiful and profound experiences that was expressed in the book was I was working a few years ago with a young woman who'd been in hospital, in a psychiatric hospital. And I was spending some time with her. And we were sat together in a cafe, and she was experiencing intense anxiety at that time and was very much very logged into what was happening at that time for her with what she felt her experience was going on at that moment. She was very plugged into it. And we were holding each other's hands, and I said to her, just for a moment, what's happening in you? And she said, I'm feeling anxious. And I said, well, what's aware of your anxiety? And she said, I am. And I said, what do you mean by I? And she said, without batting an eyelid, she said, my innocence, the love that I am. And it was so exquisite. And in that moment, I knew that this being had had an awakening to self, but had then, it was so terrifying. It is so overwhelming to the mind to come to the heart, that it then reinforces its identity to avoid it. Because within a millisecond, she was back in her identity and in her fear. So that itself was such a moment of recognition within this one that that's it, her own purity is speaking, and yet the strength of the mind to deny itself, to deny purity when it comes. And so therefore someone who is supposedly, one has to be careful obviously because someone is in hospital, but there is the potential that someone who is perceived as being mentally ill is in this vast process of coming to themselves. It's a tricky one, and I know it's a muddy water here.
Well, it's, they are so drugged up that you wonder how they ever can find themselves.
That's it. But because, of course, the next level of so-called craziness, if one wants to come, is that the walls then get so dense, and in effect, they're no different from us who are not in a psychiatric hospital. Until we recognize what we are primarily, we're all in delusion. We're all building walls to hide the purity of oneself.
Yeah.
So yes, it was an extraordinary moment.
So, hope is the biggest delusion, you say?
Yes.
I guess you're right. It keeps us in the future.
We're never inhabiting ourselves when we're in hope.
Yeah.
We're constantly in expectation. We're constantly saying happiness is when that happens.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, be hopeless and really live.
Yeah. One thing I have written down, you said, there is no mother, no father, no brother, no sister. There is no husband, no wife, no child. There is no one to support you. There is only you. Now, how did this understanding affect your relationship with your mother, with your father? We only have, I think, a minute or a couple of minutes left.
Well, profoundly, because that means one can relate without being in a relationship. One can be permanently in a state of love. It means that you're never in judgment of someone. You see them as your own self in the form of them. So your whole relationships change profoundly. You're never in demand of someone else, because you don't need someone else to complete you. No one has to tell you who you are. No one has to tell you that they love you, because you know that you'll love yourself. And that has ripples effect on them, because they feel it. Even if they don't quite know what they're feeling, they feel the love. And so their layers start to shed. It's, yes.
It reminds me on the saying, about Jesus, his mother came to him and said, Jesus, come home, and whatever. And he said, who are you? And she said, I'm your mother. And he said, I don't have a mother, only have a father in heaven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. And it's difficult for the mother and the father.
Sure.
There's a lot of, and that's been a huge part of it, is helping that to happen.
And a big chance for them to wake up.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, we're all each other's teachers in that.
Well, how fascinating. What a fascinating journey. Well, thank you for coming, Saraswathi.
Thank you so much.
I want to show you a book again. It's Averi And The Unknown. And I really can recommend it. You would love it. And as you told me, in some people it brings anger up and all kinds of things, but then is, as we just heard, a guide to find ourselves. Okay, thank you, and goodbye, and I hope I see you again soon. Bye-bye.